I'm willing to bet that everyone here wants a life of meaning and they want a life of purpose. In other words, there's nobody here who I would say, like, hey, hands up, all who want a purposeless life, a meaningless life. I don't think I'd see any hands go up. And if your hands went up, we'd probably be a little bit worried about you as to why you say that you want a meaningless life and a purposeless life. Because the fact is, we all want to be known for something. I say we all want to be famous for something, and the reason that is that that's just the way that we were designed. We were designed to be famous for something, not notorious, which is the flip side, but famous, which is the good side. And if I should ask around the room and did a poll around the room right now, who in this room here feels like that they're right where they should be, that their life is lined up with the purpose that God has aligned and assigned for them to do? Like, I bet that there'd be some hands that would go up and says, yeah, I think I am on the way, or I'm preparing, I'm doing the thing, or I'm doing the thing that God has asked for me to do. But I also would believe that there's some people in this room today who would say, that's not me. That's not me. And the reason why you would say that's not you is maybe you don't know what you were designed to do. You don't know what your purpose was. Or maybe you know what your purpose is. I get this feeling, but I don't know. I'm right here today. And, I'm on this proverbial, just like a hamster on a wheel, just spinning around. But I'm not going anywhere. I don't know how to get from where I am to where I need to be. That was my story early in my life. When I was young, and I came from Jamaica at 12, during my teenage years, I had some rough times. And the only thing that I knew in life was, it was really two things. If somebody asked me, like, Gary, what would you want? What do you want? And I would say two things. I said, I don't want to be poor, because I know what that feels like. It's not fun. And I want to be happy. Actually, I probably would say I want to have fun, because that's what I said at 19. But I believe that what was true for me at 19 is true for so many people in this room today, that you're on a happiness quest. You're on a quest like, man, I just want to be happy. I just want to be happy. And the reality is that everybody does want to be happy, but this happiness quest that you're on, for some reason, you find that it's not making you happy. It's actually filled with unhappiness. You think maybe if I find the perfect guy or the perfect girl, I'll get married, we'll have 2.2 kids, and life would be great, and I'll have this career and life will be great. But you find the guy or you find the girl, and you think that they're perfect, and it turns out that maybe they're not so perfect. And so you bounce from guy to guy or girl to girl. You bounce from relationship to relationship, marriage to marriage, job to job, career to career, major to major, school to school, bouncing around looking for happiness. And you're not finding it. All you're finding is unhappiness. And the reason is that when you pursue happiness only, you will experience fun, but temporary fun. So the real thing is that if your happiness is not aligned with God-given design, it's just fun. See, I define happiness is defined as being aligned with your God-given design. Happiness is defined as being aligned with your God-given design. And the fact is, you'll never truly be happy. You'll never have sustained happiness till you realize your God-given purpose, your God-given design, and you start to live within it. In the psalmist, in Psalms 139, David wrote this. He said this. He's like, he's talking to God, and he's like, God, your eyes have seen my unformed body. And then he says this: all the days ordained for me were written in your book before they ever came to be. I want you to imagine this, because I love telling stories. That's, and that's why I can talk forever, because I love telling stories. And so if you don't like my story, laugh along with me. Just pretend like you do. It make me feel good. So imagine that every time God created a person, so whenever God created you, whatever, God created a book. And he writes this book, and he writes, and just kind of go with me, this imagination thing. And he writes chapters in this book. He says, if Gary, this is the book of Gary, right? And if Gary does this, 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 life will be good. And Gary's book is like this. And you all have a book too. But some of us are writing chapters in the book that God didn't write. We're inserting chapters in there. And God's like, what are you doing? And you keep inserting more chapters. And all the chapters that you're inserting are leading to unhappiness, leading for you to bounce from stuff to stuff to stuff. But here's the good news about our God. For every chapter you write, God is writing another chapter to get you back to the purpose for which he created you. He's like, he's always trying to reposition you back to his purpose. You know, Paul said this in Ephesians 2:10. He said, we are God's handiwork. We're God's, another version says, we're God's masterpiece. We're God's special creation, that we're created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God prepared in advance for us to do. Now, I want you to just come with me again on another fantastic voyage, right? So imagine that God, in his design for this world, he set out different tasks. It's like, okay, I need somebody who's going to be a plumber. I need somebody who's going to be this. Somebody's going to be that, right? And God said, and then God created a person for every single thing that he prepared. You were not here on accident. Every ability or things that we may call disability was designed by God for the purpose for what he assigned for you to do. God does not make mistakes. And if you ever feel like a mistake, you need to know that ain't of God. That's what you need to know today. We need to live by design and not by default. Or I should say it this way. We need to live by his design and not by our default. You know, one of the defining moments of my life came very early in my career. And I work for a Fortune 15 company. And I've had the blessing of being mentored by some people. So early in my career, I was being mentored by this guy. He was the president of our division. I was in my early 20s. And he's like, you know, I don't know how he ended up saying he's going to mentor me. I didn't ask. He volunteered or whatever. And so, but I used to hate these mentoring sessions. Because in mentoring sessions, he was a super type A personality. And these mentoring sessions, he would come and he's like, Gary, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, I want to talk about, how do I, understand more about the business? Like, he's like, done. And it's like I would always have to have this list of things that to talk about, because he was just like, done. And, it was like, I'm like, stressing me out, bro. And he really was. I'd go in there, I had to wear a jacket all the time. Because back then we wear jackets, but it was to hide the sweat underneath my arm. And so one day, though, he said to me, he said, Gary, what do you want? What do you want? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, what do you want? So, the thing that we all say what we want, well, I'd love to be in your job. And by the way, when I'm younger, I'm trying to talk like I'm intelligent. Oh, I want to be in your job one day. I want to be, a vice president of the company. I did. It's like, I'm like, you got to talk like what you see. I really did. That's the funny part, that I really did. And he said to me, he's like, Gary, no, not what I want to hear. What do you want? And then he pulled out a piece of paper, and he said to me, Gary, I want you to fill this out. It's going to come up on the screen. It said this. I want you to fill this out. It says, here lies. Put your name in there. The date you were born on, and the date you're going to die. I was like, whoa. He's like, you don't get away from doing that. Write the date that you think you're going to die. And I wrote something in 2050. And back then, it seemed like a really far time away. Right now, it's probably 2060, 2070. And then he said, write what you would be known for if you died today. And write what you want to be known for if you died tomorrow. He said, write what would people say about you if they could sum up your life in one sentence. And that hit me. He was in essence asking me to write my own obituary. And it got me thinking for the first time about the legacy I was leaving behind. Because you see, at the time, If anybody were to write a story about me, or if I were to be truthful and write a story about myself, the first thing I'd write is, Gary's a man filled with anger. I laugh all the time, and I say I have all these books in my head that I want to write, and Emma is always saying, Gary, write that book. One of the titles I'm going to write is When I Was an Angry Black Man, because I was. And it's going to be autobiographical. It will not be the first book, because people probably wouldn't read the second. But anyway, if I were truthful, I could write that I was known for the guy who was wilding out. Some of you may know what that means. If I was truthful, I would be writing something that was not anything that was spectacular good. And what I realized is what I was known for was not what I wanted to be known for. So if I gave you the same assignment today, if I asked you, I said, hey, why don't you write your own obituary? Why don't you take that and write it down? What would you write? What would someone else write? Because oftentimes we're not truthful for ourselves. You see, on the other side of this exercise is your legacy. On the other side of this exercise is what you are famous for. And I encourage you to do this exercise with your friends, people who are close to you, with your spouse, and ask them to be truthful and says, would this be what I'm famous for? For some of you, it'll be confirmation that, yeah, I'm doing the right thing. I'm on the right trajectory. For others, it'll be an eye-opening. It'll be a wake-up call that you're out of alignment. You see, the key to live a happy life is not to pursue happiness, but it is to pursue purpose. Because purpose leads to happiness. Purpose it not only leads to happiness, not just any purpose, but God-designed, God-aligned purpose, where your alignment between your current actions and your future desires are in alignment. That's where you find happiness, and that's where you find Jesus. Jesus had some patterns that he had. He had some habits and some patterns that he did. And by following these habits and patterns of Jesus, we can have the impact of Jesus. So what did Jesus do? Jesus was the most famous person in the history of mankind. So what were some of the patterns he did? Well, the first pattern was Jesus was purposeful. Jesus knew why he was placed on this earth. Yeah, and he knew the work that God had prepared in advance for him to do. In Luke chapter 2, we see the story where Jesus was in Jerusalem. His whole family was in Jerusalem for the Passover feast. And it was customary at the time that once a year, people from all over the Jewish, all over the Judah, Palestine would come to Jerusalem to have a Passover feast. And at this Passover feast, there would be a couple of days early, but imagine like throngs and throngs of people, caravans of people going there. And so at the end of the Passover feast, everybody was time to go home, and everybody, their friends and family, and everybody got in their caravans, and they're all traveling together, friends and family, and they leave. They're traveling for a day, and at the end of the day, they look for Mary and Joseph looking around for Jesus because they thought he was with some other family members. And guess what? They couldn't find Jesus. And you can imagine the conversation. Because this is what would happen. Hey, Mary, where's Jesus? I thought you had him. That story. And they lost Jesus. And so I want you to imagine for a second. I don't know if you've ever lost a kid. I have. I know you guys have. I was in Brandsmart. They told the story, I was in Brandsmart. Jonathan was about 3 years old, 2 years old. I don't think Matthew was born yet, my two sons. And he was with me, and I turned around, and Jonathan was gone. I don't know where Jonathan was. Jonathan's my son, in case you guys are wondering. It's not some random dude out there. Just Jonathan's my son. I wasn't looking for some random dude. So Jonathan I was panicked. And I eventually found him. He was hiding around some stuff, just playing around like what kids do. That's pretty scary. But I actually wasn't going to tell this story, but I'm going to tell this story. It's worse than losing your child? Forgetting your child. So, forgetting your child. That is much worse. So, really quick story here. When I was younger, I was in Jamaica at the time. I was about 10 years old. I wasn't the smartest kid in the world. And, I said I wasn't the smartest kid. I just didn't, I don't know. I didn't like school. I hated school, whatever. And so my parents sent me to private lessons. I had private lessons after school. And this guy would come around and he'd pick us up and we'd go to his house. So I got there like 4 o'clock. My dad was supposed to come and pick me up after. Was this 4 o'clock? The lesson finished at 4:30, 5, 5:30, 6, 6:30, 7, 7:30, 8. And there was no cell phones, and we didn't have a phone in Jamaica at our house. And finally, the people at the house, they're like, the guy at the house, he's like, I got to get this kid out of my house. He's like, actually, he was worried like something happened to my dad. So he got a cab. And he put me in the cab, and he paid the cab fee, sent me home. And so when I got home, my mother said to me, Gary, where is your father? I'm like, I don't know where he is, my father. She's like, I can't believe he forgot you. I'm like, I can't believe it either. I was the one who forgot. She was hot, man. So when my dad came home around 9, he had gone by his sister's house and just hanging out with his sister. He's literally forgot me. Literally, just forgot. So my mom heard him opening the door. She goes, go hide in the closet. I'm like, it's like, so she goes, you know where the story is going. Horace, his name is Horace. Horace, where's Gary? And he goes, oh gosh. I would tell you the rest of that story. Let's just say it wasn't a very good, harmonious night in the Wallace household that evening. Word to the wise, don't ever forget your children. All right, I'm like out of time. I got to tell you this anyway. So she said to him, how could you forget? And my dad, he flipped the script on her. He's like, you think I chose to forget? He's like, I forgot. And he said it with such confidence. I was like, oh, I guess he forgot. Except my mom wasn't buying that. Anyway, back to our regular scheduled programming. So, all right, the clock guy's got to give me like 5 more minutes for that. Anyway, so they get back. So they're traveling for a day, and they realize Jesus is lost. They travel a day back, and then they look for a whole day to find Jesus. 3 days without their 12-year-old son. Can you imagine that in your mind? And they go, and they find Jesus in the temple. And you can imagine how that story went. Jesus, I can't believe it. Like, why don't you stay with the caravan? Why do you say this? And Jesus, he looked up. And he did what my son Matthew would do, because I got to pick on them equally. Every time Donna gets mad at Matthew about something, Matthew's like, Mommy, 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 Mommy. I don't want to be disrespectful, Mommy. Please stop. But Jesus did something like this. He's like, he said this. He's like, in verse 46, he says, in verse 48, he said, why do you seek me? Do you not know I'm about my Father's business? Jesus was like, I'm standing on business, man. Like, what do you want of me? You see, Jesus was purposeful, and he was preparing to do the work that God prepared in advance for him to do. He was preparing himself. And you may say that's all fine and good for Jesus, because Jesus is man, but he was also God. He knew everything before the time, and he knew his purpose. He knew what he was created for, but I don't really know what I was created for. I can't figure it out. So I'm going to tell you this morning real quick how you can discover your purpose. I'm going to give you just an indicator, and then I'm going to tell you really how you can discover it. The first thing I'll say to you is that, what breaks your heart? When you see something, what breaks your heart? Because the thing that breaks your heart is often an indicator of what God has called you and designed for you to do. But that's an easy answer, and it's not the full answer. The full answer is found in Destiny Steps. You need to go to Destiny Steps. It's a class that the church offers, and it's a whole class with tests and with feedback to help you discover your God-designed purpose. So go to Destiny Steps. So the first thing you got to do is you got to discover it. Discover your purpose. The second thing you got to do is you got to own it. You got to own it. You got to own what God created you to do. And it's very easy. For much of my life as a pastor, I wasn't comfortable in what God gave me. And I wasn't comfortable with this. I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to be that guy. And no, I gave you that. You see, God is oftentimes we want to steal somebody else's purpose. And you know what that makes us? It makes us unhappy. It makes us unfulfilled. It makes us dissatisfied. Own your purpose. If your purpose is being an educator, don't crave somebody else's money. Do your job. That's what you're called to do. There's a whole generation and generations and generations is coming from that. If you're called to be a pilot, don't complain that you're on the road all the time. That's what you're called to do. Do what it is that you're called to do. The third thing on that is that just live it. See, you got to discover it, you got to embrace it or own it, and you got to live it. So Jesus was purposeful. The second thing that Jesus was Jesus was intentional. Jesus never lost sight of what his mission was. He had a mission, and he never saw. Man, every conversation Jesus had, Jesus was like, I remember that I'm on mission. I remember that I'm on mission. He was intentional in when he chose a group of 12 men, and he says, I'm going to invest my life in you. And he picked a politician. He picked a tax collector. He picked a couple fishermen here. He picked people from all walks of life intentionally, not that people that regular people would pick, that people thought that he should pick, but people who he knew would carry out the reason why he came to earth. Jesus was intentional. He was intentional about his travel. When he traveled to Samaria at a specific time to meet a woman at the well, people were like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm going to Samaria. He intentionally put himself in time out to go pray. Like people's like, well, just one more miracle, Jesus. Like my brother is sick. I'm going to go pray. But you just healed. What are you doing? And some of you here are waiting this morning, and you're waiting for your miracle. I'm just telling you, hold on a second. Jesus is doing this thing. He coming back for you. He ain't forgot you. He ain't left you. So don't worry. Not because somebody got their miracle right now, that means you're not going to get your miracle. You're going to get your miracle. Just keep on keeping on. And Jesus intentionally rankled religious leaders. He intentionally did that because he knew they were going to kill him for it. That's part of my purpose. And that's hard, right? Because sometimes following your purpose puts you in some places that you're like, oh man, I wish I weren't here. Even Jesus himself wished that. He's like, God, if it's possible, take this cup away from me. But you know what? Not my will. I'm going to do what you designed me to do, what you said I should do. Jesus never lost sight of what his end goal was. No matter what the circumstances, no matter what came his way, no matter what temptations came his way, his actions were always designed and aligned with his mission and his purpose. You know, I love people with purpose. I love reading biographies. I just love because of people who, like, overcame odds. You know, when Martin Luther King was so effective, his words, his actions, and his reactions were all designed to get his speeches and his marches and even his beatdowns shown on national and international TV. And that's why MLK was so effective. You want to know why Nelson Mandela was so effective? Because his words, his actions, and his reactions were designed to be a great unifier of people across races and denominations. He was intentional for the 23 years he spent in prison. I believe it was 23. It was 20-something. That's a lot. Whether it's 23 or 25 is a lot, right? The time that he spent, he was intentional in befriending guards who didn't look anything like him, who were the ones who were oppressing him, and he won them over so much so that he became very effective. You know what will make you very effective? It's when your words, it's when your actions, and when your reactions are aligned with the God-given vision that you've embraced for yourself. And that doesn't just happen. It requires intentionality. You know, in my day job, I'm responsible for coming up with strategic visions for solutions for some of our companies' biggest problems that are multi-year problems that we need to solve. And it kind of sounds fancy, like, he's like, what is that? I'm like, whatever. It's actually really simple. It's three things. I'm presented with a problem, big problem, and I envision what the future looks like. Like, what is it that the solution would look like to this problem, or to this product launch, or to whatever we're going to do? So I envision the vision, the future. What will it look like 5 years from now? I take an honest assessment of where I am today, where we are as a company today, and I build steps, incremental steps to get from where we are. And I could be working on 4, 5, 6 different projects. And all these projects, I'm thinking about how a piece of this project is going to help this project, and how a piece of this project is going to help this project. Weaving together, that's what the Father does when he works everything together for good. No matter what happens, he's just like weaving. He's weaving, and he's painting this, he's weaving this tapestry like all around. It requires intentionality to follow the roadmap because it's very easy to get distracted by the next shiny object. And what's probably the problem with many of us is that we don't have a roadmap. We may have a vision of where we want to be, but we don't have a roadmap of how to get there. And so we start spinning again. We start spinning and we bounce, relationship to relationship, person to person. You may have a roadmap, but you're just not following it because it's not fun. There's something else shiny out there. You just go in and you're like, whoa. You know what happens when somebody's driving on the road and they see somebody pulled over to the side of the road? The first thing you do is your eyes go like this. And you know what happens? The vehicle starts drifting. Wherever you focus your eyes is where you're going to go. Many of us here, we need a GPS. We need a God positioning system to get you back on track towards your destination. Fix your eyes upon Jesus, who's the author. He's the finisher. He's the perfecter of your faith. Your GPS is to simply follow Jesus' habits and his patterns and being intentional. I want to give you some quick ways in which we can be intentional. The first one is learn how to say no. Learn how to say no. Jesus, as I mentioned before, did not do everything that people wanted him to do. People wanted more miracles. They wanted more rallies. People wanted, Jesus to do this, do that, to come here. And Jesus, oftentimes pulled himself to be a quiet place. And one of the tactics of the enemy is to get you really, really busy, because in your you get distracted when you're busy, and you take your eyes off it and you start to drift. And sometimes the things that you get, people demand your time, and the things that they demand your time for are oftentimes very good things. One more miracle. What could be wrong with healing my child that's sick right now? So sometimes it's a good thing, but sometimes God says, wait a minute. Doing that right now is not aligned with what I'm doing in the bigger picture. Just hold on. I'm doing something. And that principle applies to us, because not because something is good means that it's good for you. If it's not aligned with your God-given design, with your God-given assignment, then maybe it's not good for you, and learn how to say no. Here's my marriage tip for today. I told our dream team earlier this morning. We say no to the person that we should say yes to more often. And I'm not talking about Jesus right now. We're going to say yes to Jesus. But it's our spouses. One of the best marriage advice I ever got recently, over the past 3 or 4 years, is learn to say yes more often. Donna would ask me to do stuff. She goes, Gary, can you do stuff? I'm like, I don't want to go. No. Ever since I started to say yes more often, she has said yes more often. Let's move on. Another way to follow the habits and patterns of Jesus. I'm trying to keep it like what they call me, PG. All right, let's go. Another way to follow the habits and patterns of Jesus all right, Gary, is to focus on your what. I was telling Matthew this today. He's like, ooh, Daddy, Jesus wants you to lock in. So here's what you got. You're focusing, you got to lock in, whatever that means to young people. All right. He was a master of this. He was always in the present. He made little things important things, because he knew little things lead to bigger things and bigger things and bigger things. Like going out of his way to meet a woman at the well. It's just one woman when there are tons of crowds waiting to meet him. He said, bring the little children. People are like, little children? He's like, bring them to me. I'm gonna hang out and spend some time with them. I'm gonna bless them. Like going to the house of the worst of the sinners, the tax collectors. You know how bad tax collectors were as sinners? They were so bad that they had their own special category in the Bible. You know what I mean by that? Read your Bible. It says, and Jesus went to the sinners and the tax collectors. Like a whole different level of sinners, right? You know. He didn't even say the adulterers. You're like, and the tax collectors. Now, he went to their house, even though people felt there were bigger and better things to do, because Jesus knew this. He knew that when you spend time doing the little things, they lead to bigger things. And too many times we try to jump ahead without doing the prep work in the middle to get us to the end where we want to go. You know, a few years ago, and a guy named Gary Keller wrote this book, and I encourage people to read this book. It's a good book. It's called The One Thing. The One Thing. And he talks about a number of things that leads to us not making the progress that we want on the goals that we want to do. One of the things that he talked about was multitasking. And we think multitasking leads to efficiency, but multitasking leads to inefficiency. Single tasking, on the other hand, leads to efficiency. And he goes through a whole bunch of stuff inside of that. He's like, do this one small thing. And every day you do another thing, and you do another thing, and you find that you have increasing impact as you do other things, you're moving towards your goal, right? So, and then there's a physicist some years ago who did a study, he mentioned this in the book, called the domino effect. And we all know the domino effect, where you put one domino and you line them up, and you like hit them, they go around. But this physicist did an experiment, and he said that if you took any size domino, that domino could knock down a domino 50% bigger than it. So if you had a 2-inch domino, the domino could hit down a 3-inch domino. And he said that if you started that with a 2-inch domino, and you stacked up 50% bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, by the time you got to the 23rd domino, it would be the height of the Eiffel Tower. By the time you got to the 31st domino, it would be the height of Mount Everest. And he said that if you think about your little things that you do, like dominoes, every task that you do will have 50% greater effect, and 50% greater effect, and 50. Don't try to do all of it at one time. One task at a time, increasing. Jesus was always in the present. He stopped, and he did what he needed to, because he's like, I know that's a domino. That's going to lead to a bigger domino. It's going to lead to a bigger purpose. The third thing in which Jesus was intentional, he verbalized his why. And you know, even though Jesus knew his why, he verbalized it. And he verbalized it multiple times. You know, in the Old Testament, when Moses saw the burning bush, and Moses said, who should I say is like in this bush? This bush is like talking to me. A bush is talking. Nobody's going to believe that a bush talked to me. I wouldn't believe if somebody told me a bush. I would say, you've been smoking the bush. That's why you're hearing that. And so Moses is like, who should I say is the bush? And the voice said to him, I am. It's like, I am. That's even more bizarre than the bush. But Jesus himself knew that he was the great I am. He knew the reason why he came to earth. He knew everything. He knew his purpose. And so, but Jesus oftentimes spoke the words, I am. In John 6:35, he says, I am the bread of life. In John 8:12, he says, I am the light of the world. In John 10:11, he said, I am the good shepherd. In John 11:25, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. In John 14:6, he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. In John 15:1, he says, I am the true vine. In Revelation, he says, I am the Alpha, I'm the Omega, I'm the beginning, I'm the end, I'm the first, and I'm the last. He's like, look, I know who I am, but I'm going to say who I am, because sometimes y'all need to be reminded. And sometimes I need to, in Jesus' earthly body, needed to remind himself. You know what? When you verbalize your why, you know what happens? It makes it real. It makes it real. And it also holds you accountable, because people will remember and they'll say to you, well, what about, it's like, snap, I got to go do that. I'm going to write that book, Emma. I'm going to write the book. All right. The series. You know, there are many more patterns that Jesus had, but the last one I'll mention here is that if you want to have a pattern that leads to an enduring and lasting legacy and lead to being a person who people will be happy to tell your story, and you'll be happy to tell your story, your kids and your grandkids will be happy to tell your story, the pattern that Jesus had was he was compassionate. Jesus was in the people business. His father's business, when he says, I'm about my father's business, his father's business was the business of people. He came to seek and save that was lost. He came because he was not willing that any should die and go to hell, and because there's a real place called hell, right? But that everybody should come and hang out with him in heaven. And he says, look, I came. You guys are writing stories that put yourself in bondage. He's like, no. You know what? The bondage of addiction is for freedom that I came to set you free. The bondage of adultery and what? I came to set you free with that. The bondage of I came to set you free. It was freedom. I came to set you free. Jesus' mission statement is written in John 10:10. Jesus says, I came that you may have life, and life more abundantly, or life to the full. Another version says life to the full till it's overflowing. So Jesus didn't just come, but he came to give you a better life. And by the way, I've tried life with Jesus, and I've tried life without Jesus, and life with Jesus is a whole lot better than life without Jesus. I was saying to my wife the other day, actually it was yesterday, I said, there's a comedian, his name is Stephen Wright. He says, the other day I was walking. Wait a minute, that wasn't me. I thought it was pretty funny. But I was saying to my wife, some of you will get that later. If we died and found out that Jesus wasn't real, how'd you feel? And she said to me, I know that with Jesus, I have a better life. It's simple, like, by following the patterns and habits of Jesus, your life is just better. Plus, you get a guarantee of eternity with him. Anyway, so here are some ways that we can be compassionate like Jesus. We need to one another. We need to practice one another and one another. There are over 100 commands in the Bible about how we should treat each other. Here are some examples of that. In John 15:7, it says, love one another. Another one says, outdo one another in showing honor. Have fellowship with one another. Be at peace with one another. Be kind to one another. Be tenderhearted to one another. Forgiving one another. Serving one another. Always seek to do good to one another and to everyone. Bear one another's burdens. And when you do that, you fulfill the law of Christ. And if you want to know what the law of Christ is, it's summed up in 2 words. Love God. Love people. When you do these one another's, you fulfill the entire teachings of all the prophets and the teachings of Jesus. When you do it, and this is how you do it. Don and I, we speak to married couples all the time, and I'm like, they're complaining. I'm like, how about one another and each other? That's real love. This is real love. That's a song. You want to know how to love your spouse and to get everything that you desire from your spouse? One another them. Hey, marriage tip for the day, number 2. Second reason is be helpful. In other words, be a blessing. Seek to make somebody's life better. That was Jesus' message and mission statement in John 10:10. I came to give you life. Don't use people as a tool just to accomplish your purpose. By the way, you will not accomplish your purpose if you're using people as tools to accomplish your purpose. That's kind of like backwards thing, but it just works. You just trust me on that. Rather, seek to help people to accomplish theirs. And everything that you give out comes back on every wave. It's a principle of sowing and reaping. It just pays dividends. And last thing I'll say today before I wrap up is be a reconciler. Jesus was a reconciler. Do not be a divider, but be a reconciler. Pastor Emma said this in a message last year. She said, don't be a peace faker. And sometimes you're like, hey, come in. Nana, how you doing? Well, she doesn't do this anymore, but she did it in the early days. I was like, I'm fine. Man, whenever your wife says, I'm fine, they are not. There's a life in the pit of hell. They're not fine. It's like, choose another word to say you're fine when you're really fine. That's a peace faker. But many of us are peace takers. We look for reasons to just get annoyed. We get annoyed with our spouse, we get annoyed with our kids, we get annoyed with our boss, and then we tell somebody else that we're going to be a peacemaker. But we should be a peacemaker. Romans 12:8 says this, if it's at all possible, as much as it depends on you, live peaceably with all men and women. You know, it's an election cycle. There's going to be a lot of things that come around that gets you all riled up. But you know, Jesus had a politician, Simon the Zealot, in his midst. And Jesus put people first before politics. He talked about what was good for people. So we may not agree on what's best for people, but here's something we can agree on. What's best for people is best. We can agree that what's best for people is best, so seek what is best for the person in your circle, for the person around you, for the person that you can. We don't get a choice on this one. This is not even up for debate. It's part of every single one of our purposes. It's inherent. How do I know this? 2 Corinthians 5:18 says this. All of this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ. He did it first. He set the example. He set the pattern. And then he gave it to us. The ministry of reconciliation. So what do we got to reconcile? Everything we do, everything we say, every one of our words, even when our spouse annoys us, every one of our actions, even when our kids annoy us, every one of our reactions, whenever everybody annoys us, must be with the knowledge that we were given the ministry of reconciliation. So how are you doing with this? Jesus gave this pattern for a meaningful life, for a purposeful life, for leaving a legacy, for having a story that people are proud to tell. How are you doing with this? See, I faced the same question as I was doing this. I was like doing introspection, like, Gary, how are you doing with this? Because like it or not, one day you will die. One day you will die. One day somebody is going to write a eulogy. And they're going to write down what you are known for, what you are famous for. And the question is, will what they write be what you wanted to be famous for? What you were designed to be famous for? You know, Jesus is calling you right now. He's calling me too. When I say you, I'm included. To a life of intentionality. He's calling us to a life of compassion. He's calling us a life of purpose alignment. And it's time for realignment. It's time for realignment. So as I come to the end of this message, I'm going to ask you to do a couple things. I'm just going to ask you to bow your heads. And the reason why I'm doing that, it shuts out distractions. There's nothing, I'm not going to do any hocus pocus stuff or anything like that. I want you to pray this prayer. It says, God, what are you saying to me right now? So the fact is, you were brought here today for a purpose. You didn't just show up in here by accident. So God, what is it that you're saying to me right now? You know, I believe God is speaking. I don't know where this message hits you, but wherever it hits you, if you'd like, with everybody, nobody's looking around, if you'd like for me to pray for you, I just ask for you to raise your hands, and I want to pray for you. I see those hands. I see those hands on that side. I see those hands. I see those hands. I see those hands over there. I see those hands in the back. I see those hands. You can put your hand down. Before I close, before I pray, I want to talk brief to some people who need to be reconciled to God. You see, all this can just be taken and you just do it, and it'll be great. Your life will be better, but your life will not be good. Your life will not be great. Because the one who enables you to do it is the one who wants to come and live inside of you. And that's what reconciled to God really means. Some of you have walked away. God's calling you back. He's like, I'm inside of you, but you like pushed me to a little corner of your house. And God says, look, reconciliation for you means allowing me to come and take over your whole body because I have better for you. So if that's you and you want to be reconciled to God or reconciled back to God, I'll ask you to just raise your hand, and I want to pray for you too. You know, nobody's looking around. Anybody's like, yeah, I see the hands over there. I see the hand. I see those 2 hands back there. I see those 4 hands. I see those hands over there in the corner. Let's just pray as we close. Heavenly Father, God, I believe this message that you gave me is for those people, as it is for me when I was sitting in my room on Thursday night. God, I pray that you will give a sense of clarity. It's like a clarity. Lord, I pray that each and every person will do the hard work of discovering their God-given purpose, their God-designed purpose before the foundation of the world. They'll seek out what it is. Lord, I pray for each and every person who asks that. Lord, that they'll start to realize and take bold steps and walk in it. And Lord, for those, Lord, who has never accepted you, and for those who have pushed you to the side, God, Lord, I pray that you will just right here, right now, convict them to say this prayer that I'm going to ask you to say right where you are. Dear God, I ask, Lord, that you'll come and take full control of my life. Lord, I want all of you. Lord, I know that your words are true, and in you there's a better life. Lord, come and take control now. In Jesus' name, amen. Hey, you know what happens when you just did that? Because Jesus in you, and he's is famous in heaven and feared in hell, guess what? You too are famous in heaven and feared in hell. God bless you.
We are celebrating with you, and we want to walk this journey together. And if you prayed that prayer or you want to know more about Jesus, follow the prompts that are on the screen right now. Our vision is God's vision for you, and that's to see you live a better story, holy, healthy, happy, and bringing heaven to earth. And if you've been impacted by what you hear, partner with us.
Yeah, together we can make both an epic and an eternal difference. The giving options are coming up on the screen to share the love and see people meet Jesus and live that better story.
Hey, and if you're in the South Florida area, we would love to see you in person. Check out the description below for times and places where we can meet, and we'd love to see you soon.
Yes, where friends become family at History Makers Church.